Fair one.
Well, hi there, and welcome to this next instalment in the Frasers Perspective podcast series. I'm Daniel Goodfellow, and I'm joined today by Nigel Edgar. Nigel is the General Manager of Residential for New South Wales for Frasers Property. And Nigel, firstly, let me welcome you. Hello.
Hi, Dan. Thanks.
It's probably helpful just to describe briefly the kind of business that you run, because it's a very sizable part of the overall Frasers business.
The Frasers New South Wales residential business is pretty diverse. We do high-rise apartments. We do greenfield master plan communities. Really, most of the projects we do are master planned, and it's community creation for communities, anything from 400 dwellings up to, in the case of Shell Cove, where we're doing 3,000 dwellings around a new golf course and a new marine precinct, and we do mixed use. It's residential, but really it's about community creation.
So I want to go all the way back to the beginning of your career, if we can. As I understand it, you were on the tools. You started as a carpenter. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. But I left school at the age of 16,
right.
year 10.
Yeah.
My mother... I was far more interested in sailing and surfing.
Yeah.
My mother tried to push me into doing a trade, and I ended up doing a pre-apprenticeship course. And AV Jennings, who are probably the nation's largest builder developer at the time, maybe Hookers were another one of similar size. They came along and they were looking for new apprentices. And I sat an interview at the time, and I showed some of the work that I did. Next thing you know, I had a job at AV Jennings.
So tell me it must have been a very different environment in terms of the types of homes you were building compared to now. I mean, how has, in that 30, 40-year time span, how have things changed?
Yeah, the market's changed a lot. To give you an idea, when I bought my first home, I was 25 and I bought a little house in Willoughby. But the banks were really tight on the way they would lend. My wife and I, we were earning reasonably well for our age, but the bank would not lend more than 80% of the value of the property we were buying. Same was applied to everybody. So we either had to save, that 20%, or they'd lend you an extra 10%, but at a much higher interest rate. And so banking policy at the time, it kept houses modest because it's what you could afford. And so that was reflective of the way houses were developed in the suburbs. And so, they were small houses. They were, 100 square metres, or at least half the size of the average house which is being constructed nowadays. Yeah. So it's very different, and it's a fair bit more modest than what it is today. Although that is lessening. We've peaked at housing size probably 5 years ago.
Yeah. This pendulum's kind of swinging a bit back now, isn't it? But it's really the market that's driving that more than people's tastes.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt affordability is driving dwelling size. I think a lot of families still have an aspiration for a large lot of land and a big house, but then they look at their budgets and then they start to compromise. We still get people walking into our display villages saying, I want a 1,000 square metre block where, the average size today is about 450 square metres. Yeah. But that's where they start. Where they finish is a totally different thing, and that takes in their budget and, what you can actually deliver in the way of amenity, both in project community and the landscape outside areas and also in the internal amenity of the inside of the home.
You mentioned before that nearly everything that you do in New South Wales is master planned. What is this concept of master planning? What makes something master planned versus not?
Okay, so this is my language about it, but we look at the physical form of the space that we have, the site we have.
Yeah.
Then we look at how it fits into the broader community. So we take a 5, 10, 15 kilometre view as to where do we fit in that community. And then we make sure, through market research and careful planning, that we position ourselves to offer a premium value offering inside of that community, and we bring things to the community which the community wants to have. So there's spatial things like parks, landscape, amenity. If we can bring retail or some commercial space in the right proportions, we bring that with it as well. So we make sure that we fit at a community level.
Yep.
First and foremost, because your buyers always come, the large proportion of your buyers come from 5 or 10 kilometres.
Yeah.
And it's been like that, God forever,
Forever.
For as long as I can remember,
Yeah. Do you think that the sort of master planning of the sites that you now work on, that the complexity is greater than it used to be? Like it's tempting to conclude that it used to be that you kind of grabbed a big bit of land, you carved it up into lots, maybe there was a bit of amenity there, whereas now, because density is increasing, there's a lot more built form, there's a lot. It seems to me that it's a lot more complex, but I don't know if that's right.
Spatial constraints, whereas in the old, in the 80s, you had more room, you could set a parcel of land aside for a shopping centre and another parcel of land aside for some business precincts, where now it's much more intense, it's integrated, it's together, and it's also highly activated. So you have to be very careful when you design it that you get it right the first time round, because if you don't, fixing something like this is very challenging and extremely costly. And we're spending very large lumps of money. So, master plan communities don't happen by accident.
Yeah.
Really good master plan communities happen through lots of planning, lots of consultation, and also respect for the local community. We talk to everybody to make sure we know what we're doing and we know that we're going to fit.
So what about government? Where does government fit in all of this? Because it seems to me the government's becoming more ambitious than it used to be in terms of the kinds of things that they're envisioning. But, are they well equipped to manage these large-scale, complex developments? Government
works well when they get their planning right.
Right.
You would never say, taking a 20-year history of New South Wales, the government planning has worked well. We've had stock supply in New South Wales, which has dramatically affected us at the end of 2005 to about 2015. Much of that stemmed from political decisions made by government in and around the time of the Sydney Olympics, when the then view of the government was Sydney was full, so they stopped planning for new residential and for growth in the community. And so when government gets it right and they have proper medium and long-term strategic plans, it works out very well. Melbourne probably is an example of far better planning than what Sydney's had. Sydney has been ad hoc, divisive. The community feels forgotten and ignored in New South Wales because of the way that government planning has been undertaken. Now, you'd have to say that in the last 3 or 4 years, with the introduction of the Greater Sydney Commission in Sydney, that you've got people in the brief by the then Minister for Planning on bringing in a statutory department to take a plan going out 40 and 50 years. That's the right move, and I think the measures they're taking are the right move. But it'll take another 5 or 10 years at least before we start to see any benefit. And we're hemorrhaging right now in Sydney because everybody's anti-development. We're anti-development because the population in Sydney has grown rapidly over the last 5 years, much because there's been so much job creation with all the new infrastructure which is being built in Sydney. So everybody's come to Sydney to get a job. We've had to house them somewhere. And it's so evident that the roads are full, they're blocked, and simply it's because no infrastructure has been provided, and the infrastructure should come before the population. But in this situation, it's been the reverse. So development is on the nose.
So, there's no question that there's a delicate balance between the role that government and developers and communities as well play. To take one example that had everybody kind of glued to their newspapers and televisions over the summer, the Opel Tower in the Sydney Olympic Park. What is there to learn about that? And what's your take on what there is to learn out of it?
The Opel Tower is a circumstance where there's a combination of a few problems. I'm not really deeply close enough to it, but I do know that as you build big buildings, you need lots of scrutiny. We work in a design and construct environment where an engineer is commissioned to design a building, and through their professional indemnity insurance, they accept liability for their design.
Right.
The builder then brings in another contractor to do the next layer. It could be hydraulic design or electrical engineering, so these buildings are built up by one layer of design on top of the other layer of design. Then what's happened is, as the contractor who has been installing as per the engineer's design, they haven't absolutely followed the specification, and there's been some compromise there.
Right.
And so the lesson to be learned is to make sure you have very high levels of attention to detail in your project management teams to make sure things are built properly.
Right.
Now, the engineer who designed the building, Opel building, signed it off and said it was fit for purpose and was all okay. That engineer was not aware, clearly, that people had made compromises.
Yeah, right.
For Frasers, we have project management teams who are on site, and they oversee those activities all the time. To build Discovery Point, we had a team of about 8 project managers on site the whole time, watching and making sure we got everything right. Good quality, reputable developers bring that level of extra scrutiny. Private developers who may only be a $2, private company with very little value may not even have a project management team. They just accept the certificates from the engineer.
Right.
I always say to people, make sure you know who is building your property.
Yeah.
And make sure that they're trustworthy because you only get one chance at it.
Yeah. I mean, it really is interesting, isn't it? I think people will be looking with greater scrutiny at exactly right. Who's building it? What's the developer's background and history? Does the government bear any culpability for lack of regulation, or do you think this is mainly private between the companies?
I would like to think that we don't overreact in this circumstance.
Right.
One of the problems I guess I have most concern about is the number of people who are builders or developers with no skill in the industry. They might be somebody who's been able to buy a site, and then they bring in a designer who then designs something for them, and they bring in a project marketer, and then they bring in a builder. But that person who assembles some of the parts might have no idea as to what it is they're doing. They may not understand the market or how to construct, so they don't understand it properly. You don't have to have any qualifications to run a private vehicle to build or deliver any high density. To me, that's something which probably should be looked at.
Yeah, right.
But do I think that the lower levels of the actual scrutiny at the ground level should be identified? No, I don't. I think our regulations are adequate there. But Phoenix developers, who are companies who come in and with only a $2 liability, they're the ones who end up doing brand damage to our industry.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think, given that, as you said, the last few years in Sydney, the policy settings seem to be on a better track, what should the average person be wanting from government when it comes to infrastructure delivery and planning, and what do you think we need more of over and above the strides they've made in recent years?
Really, what's happened in New South Wales, it's been catch-up up until now. We still don't have all these new motorways, WestConnex, and the new Sydney Metro lines. I think all that's fantastic. And once they're established in the mid-20s, you'll see a very different Sydney. At least that's my perspective.
Right.
I want to see that we've got a government who's looking another 10 years out from that, another 10 years out from that.
Yeah.
And so the planning is right. This is a city which is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter, and so it's going to need much more public transport to be connected. It's interesting, on all of our projects, all bar two of them have good connection to trains. Anything with a good connection to trains sells at least 50% faster sales rate than what you get for those who aren't. So that's the public straight away telling you they want to be connected to transport. People are very welcoming to higher density living as long as it's well connected. And so to me, I want a government who takes a long-term view, not a short-term political view. God knows how we fix that, but that's what I would want to see. And also with a vision to how we fit in the environment.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say how distressing it is to see what's happening in the world where, the reefs are bleaching through global warming and, plastics and the decay. We're having the fish kills which are going on in Western New South Wales today. We've just done so much to ignore our environment, and it's not that difficult to get plastics out of the way we live and also to make sure we build buildings that are sustainable.
Are you optimistic about the future?
Yeah. I'm a developer. Of course I am, yes.
Do you have any election predictions for New South Wales?
No. I guess my focus is I do some work with the PCA, Property Council, and my focus is simply just about making sure that the government understands the challenges which developers have. And governments have a history in the top of a cycle. And exactly what's happening now is we're getting taxed for everything because developers have made far too much money in the top of a development cycle. And so now projects are becoming unviable, and that'll be a challenge. So what's going to happen is we're going to go through a period where there's lots of stock, and then there'll be no stock because developers can't afford to develop them. And that will then drive through supply and demand, prices up again, and then the cycle will reseat. I'd like to see the government has a better empathy and understanding as to what it really costs and takes to deliver. But I think the truth of it is we've got a few tough years in place. The taxation levels on developers are up, so it's making it hard for developers. And on top of that, the changes in banking with APRA are making it far more difficult for people to afford to borrow. So that's going to drive property values down. Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? Is it 3? I just don't know. I do know that Sydney's unemployment rate is still very, very low. Our job creation in Sydney is still is quite robust. And in fact, only this morning did they say in the CommBank business, state by state measure that New South Wales is back at number one.
Right.
Because of its employment growth. The employment growth is what drives the building sector or the development sector.
Right.
So normally for every new job you create, you create a new dwelling. So I expect to see that there will be ongoing demand. And it'll be interesting to see whether we're able to supply the amount of stock in the marketplace with the new levels of taxation that the government's applying.
Right. Interesting. When you think back on one of the interesting things about developing large master plan sites is that so much of the success or failure of that site can really only be judged sometimes 10 or 20 years down the track once it's sort of settled into the community and its roots have kind of extended beyond the boundaries of the site. When you think back on and you don't necessarily need to name them, but on some kind of examples of sites you've been involved in, what has led to success or failure? I'm interested in both. Where do you see good decisions leading to success and sometimes bad decisions leading to failure?
Good projects have a heart, and so they'll be built around the key piece of amenity, a train station or a retail shopping centre, and walkable and connected to. Where people want to live is where they can go and get a meal on the weekend if they want to, or pick up some groceries easily, and it's safe for the kids, and so it's walkable, accessible, connected, and places for the community to get together. And the communities which best reflect that are the ones that are the greatest success. Probably the one which rings to mind to me is the ponds in northwest Sydney,
Right.
which is well connected. It's got good riparian zones. It's close to amenity, and that grew and grew and grew at a time where Sydney needed really high quality. Projects like Central Park, which offer high level of amenity, retail, some business, walkable, accessible. That's been another enormous success, as a discovery point. And you know, the great projects are the ones which are connected and walkable and easy and comfortable to live in, and they have a core centre which is easy to identify.
Right. And where do things go wrong? Like what mistakes do developers make, do you think, that lead to bad outcomes?
They don't talk to their communities.
Right.
The community will always tell you what it needs. You have to do your market research. You have to be, make sure that you are thoughtful and structured about the way you approach any development site. Market research has to be the point that drives everything that you do. No point in having your own dream and vision if it's not based on market fundamentals. Is there demand for it? And can the stock that you bring to market match the market demand? So you've really got to make sure that through market research, focus groups, talking to the local community, whether what you're delivering aligns with the demand levels.
And what they're actually after. Well, look, I think we might leave it there, but I guess my final question is, if you think back to coming right back to the beginning, you think back to your young self at the age of, it must have been 16 or 17, heading into a career in the industry. And, we're now living in a time when less and less people are doing trades. There's a general sense that everyone has to do a university degree in order to get anywhere in life. What would you say to a 16-year-old version of yourself today?
There's a lot of young kids coming through independent schools and public schools who are picking up trades, and they're doing quite well for themselves. And there's some very wealthy tradespeople out there. All the buildings and all the developments go on need organised trade. So there's a good career in the trade sector. And however, the difference is when you're building higher density projects, we do need people with degrees to be able to deliver them, because there's higher levels of attention to detail, far more sophistication in the building techniques and technologies. And so we are looking for people who do that type of building, the kind of buildings that Frasers do, the high density. They need to have qualifications. I've just come through. I've been sales managers, construction managers, and I happen to work my way through it. It's harder for people to do that in the sophisticated level of the industry, which is where we're at. But there's fantastic careers still to be a bricklayer, a carpenter, an electrician, all of those trades, because their services levels where actually our community is losing those skills today. So, I'd completely encourage it.
All right. Well, Nigel, thank you very much. That's great.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Good on you.